Imagine being at the center of a global digital storm. The world is watching, the media is shouting, and you are the one holding the compass for one of the most scrutinized brands on the planet. For Anthony Neal Macri, this wasn't a hypothetical. It was his daily reality at Ashley Madison. He was the guy who understood the more, faster, louder engine of North America tech better than anyone. But then something flipped. He realized the constant momentum isn't the same thing as clarity. Today, Anthony isn't running a 100-mile per hour agency in Toronto or New York. He's calling in from southern Italy. He hasn't opted out of tech, but he's still deep in the world of AI, but he's changed the frame. He's trading urgency for discernment. Today, we're exploring how to flip the default narrative of hustle without losing your ambition. Anthony, welcome to the Flip Story.
Thank you. Thank you. Very excited.
Excellent. So, Anthony, you're currently in southern Italy, a place where restraint is a social value. Um, but before we kind of go too deep, why don't you tell us a little bit about your now? What are you up to right now?
Right now, I'm involved in a number of AI projects here in Italy, in North America. I'm a consultant for digital marketing. Um, I haven't stopped really working in the field. I've just changed the geography of it all. I find myself fairly often in the US and Canada. Toronto, New York are still home. What changed is just what the cities mean to me. Meaning, I'm still there very often, but I feel like I'm better and more productive from south of Italy rather than the big cities.
All right. I think that's a wonderful kind of launch point for us. So, I think, a lot of these big cities is kind of, East Coast architecture, very velocity driven, West Coast US too. Um, certainly startups and a lot of the spaces that you touch with AI and digital marketing are all very fast paced.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, velocity gets confused with performance. Moving fast means you're being productive, where I think that's not necessarily. I wouldn't call it a mistake. It's just I think depending on the on what you're working on, and particularly in my field, being a creative, working in marketing campaigns, and designing what are the client journeys from a marketing perspective, advertising perspective. I think being taking a step back and being an observer rather than being in it allows you to have a lot better clarity.
Okay, so let's stay in it for a minute
Okay.
with where you were in terms of we'll call it a velocity mindset. Maybe you got a different language for it, but I want to talk specifically in that space. And we'll get into Ashley Madison in a moment as well. But I want to talk about anxiety. What did that feel like when you were kind of trading, when you were viewing the world in terms of velocity equals productivity?
Yeah, I think the problem is in a lot of the startup tech world is that if you're in a room in a boardroom full of anxious people, anxiety then it becomes how productivity is measured. Every email, every contact, every single touch point, that anxiety that keeps you moving forward becomes what gets confused for productivity. And that for me was for the major part 15 years of my career. It wasn't necessarily about like it wasn't so much about what am I doing. At the end of what the question I try to answer myself is, where am I going? What am I building towards? Because sure, you can wake up at 5 a.m. every morning and being busy, but busy doesn't translate in productivity or actually doing something meaningful for your business or for your clients, that is.
Right. I think that's fair. And was for you, you're in this journey. You still haven't made your flip. Was there a specific moment where you had this kind of realization that your definition of more wasn't necessarily an answer to happiness, and it was maybe a pressure trap of sorts?
Yeah, I guess I think it all came. shortly after, the Ashley Madison hack, I started working for a number of other startups as, director of marketing, VP of marketing. Um, and the flip came when I visited the south of Italy for a summer. I was here for about 5 weeks. This was a vacation, sort of a work vacation. It wasn't necessarily a full blown vacation, but I was lucky enough to be here for a full 5 weeks. And that's when I realized that I could do this. There wasn't really anything that I was missing from the city, from the perspective of career work. And I think this has become even more obvious recently after COVID, because the world has become more digitalized. Companies have become more digitalized, and they're more likely, more willing to accept remote workers. So the geography has less of an impact than it did before. The flip was when I discovered that, even sitting in a piazza having coffee and sitting beside a stranger and exchanging a few words were sometimes more meaningful, than a conference call or a brainstorming session with my team. Sometimes clarity just arrives when you least expect it, or, walk on the beach with my dog. Um, you know, the other day, for example, this happened recently. I was working with this AI company based in Italy, Lingua Check. I was trying to figure out what would be the best way to reach a certain audience for this company, and the idea, which was absolute, you know, I was like, I have to present to the client because I'm not even sure this is going to work. But it came at 6 in the morning when I was with the dog on the beach. I was just me myself, and that space, creativity sometimes needs space to breathe, and it's not necessarily physical space, but also just mental space. Because that way, and this is something that I wasn't able to do very often in Toronto or New York. I used to run to yoga or whatever other sort of session available, doing breathing exercises. There's all sorts of apps and all sorts of gurus and services you can purchase. But it always felt scheduled. It never felt like, natural, like I'm stepping out, just, for coffee. Everything felt very scheduled, very structured. And all that structure, and even the structure itself, felt like it was some sort of like performance. But when you think about it, scheduling every aspect of your life, is it really performance, or it's just a way of conforming to what everybody else is doing? So if you meet your friend for coffee at Starbucks and they're like, oh my god, I'm so busy, I only have 10 minutes, you almost feel guilty to be like, technically I have 5 hours if you want to sit, but that never happens. Where here, yes, sometimes it's, what I love about it is that here, there is a time you take your time to actually enjoy the little moments. And when you go out with a friend, or you go out, there isn't really an hour. It's not scheduled. It's like, okay, I'll see you at 7, but there is no what we're going to do. It's just, let's just be together and then decide as we go what's going to happen. But I think that sense of wonder is also important when it comes to business and when it comes to creativity and marketing. It's just being able to actually observe and being in the moment, because ultimately, particularly with AI, you know, we, I can ask ChatGPT to write hundreds of advertising campaigns in seconds. It's not the same as, actually being in the product, understanding the product, the people that use it, the people behind it, and that part of the communication, that part of, that emotion, that gets passed on to the client. And that the possible client in the advertising campaign does make a difference in this case.
Right. All right. We have a lot to talk about, but I want to come back to this origin story in a few minutes because I think this is fascinating. This is, I've observed that there's others who have not necessarily the same story. They don't come to the same conclusions, but they've had that kind of that eureka moment of, say, the 5-week trip or the trip of a lifetime that they then turn into, well, this is now my new life. This is now my origin. I think that's wonderful. But I do want to spend a little time, just a couple minutes, not necessarily on Ashley Madison per se, but I think it's a fascinating company, and I think you bring a lot of perspective into the world through Ashley Madison. I think at the time you were there, it was a really big
Crazy.
brand, crazy brand. It managed to set and define a category that I think you were in the middle of it, and you used the word crazy. I wouldn't disagree. Uh, I wasn't there, but I get the sense. What I kind of find fascinating, and maybe a lesson you can share with others, is Ashley Madison was sitting in this space. They were the leader. They were ahead of the pack, if you will, but the pack was running at them real fast, clearly. And you were in the middle of that. You were doing SEO and digital marketing for them, so you physically could see that better, probably perhaps than anyone else at the organization. What's some advice for companies looking to kind of get ahead and still maintain this kind of your perspective on how not to be, more for the sake of more pressure, and how to really be truly, if you had to look back, how to be best successful in a really high paced, supercharged space.
I think there is two takeaways from my time at Ashley Madison. One is, and this is something that has helped me and continues to help me in today, and has always helped me. Um, Being a product that millions used, but nobody wanted to admit to use. And that's regardless of my personal perspective on ethics and if you should or you shouldn't. I'm not here to tell people what's the difference between right and wrong. That's a very personal choice. But I think one of the lessons that's fascinating, and it continuously helped me, is this. Imagine having to market a product that nobody's willing. I mean, people want the money. Companies want your advertising money, but they're not willing to advertise it because, of course, of the repercussions and your brand and what you do. So, as a marketer, you have to find alternative ways to get in front of people. And if you can't do it through normal channels, meaning, buying Facebook ads, Google ads, or, TV network ads. What you need to do is find alternative ways. And sometimes that means, news jacking, attention jacking, which is, sometimes you need to think outside the box and use alternative ways of advertising. And while that might not be necessary if you're advertising, I don't know, some sort of skincare product or some clothing or some SaaS product or whatever, that's still very, very useful, because while the world is advertising on the usual channels, there is millions of other channels that are just as effective when it comes to reaching your target audience, that are not the usual three, four suspects. So that's
That
one lesson. And that's because for us, we had to be extremely original, extremely creative in order to get press, in order to get advertising. Sometimes that also meant getting some people angry, some billboards that were not necessarily very tasteful, but that meant we would end up on television because people were mad at us. That's still advertising. Not necessarily the usual way of doing advertising, but still got the job done. So the people that were interested in our product still got the message. Whether it was, and maybe it was a journalist, or maybe it was a Christian group that was really angry at us because we were doing the unthinkable. Regardless, we cut through and we managed to get advertised. And that lesson, as I said, I think is extremely useful to anyone that works in the market, that works in the marketing industry, or is looking to market their own product or company. Not necessarily getting people angry. Just there are a million of ways to advertise a product, and it's not necessarily the usual four suspects that I'm sure I don't need to mention because everybody knows who they are. you know. And the other lesson is speed, and when it comes to speed and public scrutiny, the most important part is not to never confuse the person that you are online, your praises, your criticism. That's not necessarily who you are. That's kind of like saying you're outsourcing who your persona is, and taking a step back and moving away from the noise. Sometimes it's how you actually find your ground again.
think that those are both pretty awesome lessons. And so let's kind of take that second lesson in particular, and let's talk a little bit about that in terms of your journey. This is, I think, an important part of, often folks tie so much of what they're doing to who they are. And you seem to be able to decouple that to some extent with not so much who you are, but where you are. Um, what's a big piece of kind of share around that? How did you manage to do that? How did you clearly you've done it pretty successfully from what I can see. You seem well, candidly, you seem very happy, you seem very confident, you seem very comfortable. So how did you manage to kind of move from that super hyper scheduled kind of reality you just mentioned into this other kind of version of Anthony, um, with some degree or maybe even a high level of success around that?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before briefly, I think it's managing to it's discerning between movement, constant movement, and confusing it for performance or productivity. Instead, it's about I live a life where I choose my clients. I talk to companies and projects virtually every day. But one of the choices, well, not choices, but one of, I guess, the luxuries is the fact that I can actually choose projects that I'm passionate about and projects where I think I can actually bring value to the table, where my expertise, but also my creativity is useful to them. So it's not necessarily just about taking in the clients, which is a lot of agencies are consultants. It's about numbers. If you come through my door, we'll find a way to work. I'll bill you the hours, and I'll give you the usual canned content, the strategy, whatever sort of um, strategy handbook I can throw at you and say, hey, this is how I would tackle it. You pay me X amounts per hour and we'll get it done. What instead it's about taking the projects, taking the clients, and taking the activities that actually make you feel good, and also being able to also do nothing, which is one of the I guess in the Italians have found a way of communicating beautifully, which is dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing. That is also very useful to a person's career, doing nothing. And in that nothing, that space you create for yourself, you can actually find inspiration, and find ways to perform better when time comes to work. So I think ultimately it's about dividing your personal life and the career is not doesn't make the person. They're two very separate things. And I think that's been the most important thing that I've learned moving to the south of Italy, because one of the most interesting, this is something that I actually tell often to all my friends and colleagues and people I know in North America. If you meet somebody in a bar in New York, very shortly after you introduce yourself, they're like, "What do you do?" Um, that's unthinkable in Italy. If I was to ask somebody that at a coffee shop, they'd be like, "What do you mean? I'm having coffee. This is what I'm doing." It's unthinkable to ask people, what do you do for a living, because it's just not something you ask. You ask them how they are, how's their day, what they like to do in their spare time. Work is just work, but it's not the person. Where in a lot of ways in North America, your job, what do you do, it's kind of like the way your persona is built, right? So you're like, oh, I'm VP of this.
Right.
Automatically you've built what it is that that outsourced vision of who you should be, the perception, which is less about who you really are, and it's more about how will the others perceive me. Where I am in south of Italy, if I sit at a coffee shop and some old nonno sits with me, they couldn't care less about what I do. And even if I try to explain to them, they'd be like, I really don't care, tell me what you're doing this weekend for fun. you know
Right. All right. So let's stay in that origin story. That's a perfect segue into kind of where you're at. So I do have some questions. I'm super curious about this. So you show up, you have this trip, this
Mhm.
work trip. What was the work trip for? to get you to
No,
southern
it
Italy?
wasn't work. I was working remotely. So,
Got it.
but it was kind of like a hybrid. I
And
had two
you do you
weeks of
have
vacation,
family?
but I extended. What's that?
Yeah. Do you have family down in southern Italy, or how'd you get there?
So yeah, funny story. So I was born in Canada. And then when I was two, I moved to Italy, where I completed my studies to high school. Then moved to Canada for my university masters. Then I stayed because in Toronto, those were the years of the startup, the startup bubble, Toronto, New York. And so I was living in Toronto. I was, working. I had an incredible, beautiful life, successful, friends, trips, whatever is that I wanted. And then one summer, decided to come to the South. The South is where I spent all my summers as a child. Um, you know, Great memories, grandparents, the beach, eating on the beach, all those things that, when you grow up, they kind of just stay in your memory, as in like that's a distant memory. Like I couldn't do this anymore, like, well, maybe I can afford to do it once a year for a week or whatever. So I came here for 5 weeks, and I I found myself in situations, in moments that felt so natural, so meaningful, profound, like small conversations, connecting with people, but not connecting as in like, chatting with your Starbucks barista. It was, like those little micro lessons that at the end I was like, okay, I don't think I know what I'm doing, or if I'm doing, meaning what am that's why before I said it's like what am I doing, but it's more about where am I going. What am I building towards? Because as far as I was concerned, in Toronto, I had an incredible life. I had everything I wanted, but I really didn't know what I was building. Just I had everything, but there wasn't really um, uh, a prize at the end. It was just like, okay, I'm just in this constant movement. There's always something more, something better, faster. Change company, bigger role, bigger company, but there wasn't really an end to that race. That being said, me moving to the South of Italy hasn't really stopped my ambition. It's just that ambition has to be grounded into something that's valuable to me, even from it has to allow me to continue to have a personal life that I wake up in the morning and I'm happy. I look forward, I look forward to waking up, going for a walk on the beach with my dog, all those things. And then there's work, and work is still great. I still enjoy very much what I do. And as I said, I'm very lucky that I'm in a position where I can choose the clients I take on, the projects I take on, because I personally, if I say yes to a client, I want to make sure that I'm giving my 100% from a vision, creative perspective. I don't want it to just be, pay me a retainer and we'll see how that goes. So it's about finding that balance where both aspects of your life are in complete harmony. You know,
So, okay, so you got this moment. You fast forward a little. So you go on this trip. You go back to Toronto.
yes.
How long were you there for before you made the move?
Well, funny enough, I went back, and then COVID kind of just started happening. So, I had already decided while I was here that I wanted to move here. There was absolutely no reason,
Yeah,
to stay. And it was funny because, like my partner, he worked, um, he manages all the Mervish, all the theater musical stuff for the Toronto Theater Company. So, for example, we had access to all the shows, all the press passes. We were the first ones to see, first row
right.
tickets, and tickets to opera, tickets to orchestra, tickets to concerts. And it got to that point where sometimes I would be like, I really don't feel like going. And he would tell me, he would be like, okay, but we bought the tickets. You have to give me the money. I was like, I'll pay your ticket just to not go. Like, I'll reimburse you the money. Just leave me alone. I want to stay home. So that it was already happening where I was like, I don't like, all this doing is not really making me happier. It just making me tired, and it just this constant running. So we had already decided to move, and then COVID happened. So what happened was we just moved faster because the
Right.
fear was, we didn't know what was going to happen. So instead of waiting, because we had planned to, for me, it was about, I think I was like, okay, I need about a year and a half to prepare everything and move. And then I think it happened in under a year. So I think the summer, yeah, the summer after I had moved here.
Wow. How old were you at the time, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, it was about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So it was about 30.
30. You think you could have done that move at 25?
No,
No. Yeah, harder.
I
No, it's
don't
alright.
know.
I'm just kinda curious.
Well, no, because I have a lot of friends that ask me the same question. And generally what I tell, uh, 25, 26, 27 year olds, it's not necessarily a question of age. It's a question of where you are in life. And I always say the same thing is big cities, New York, Toronto, Boston, Chicago, whichever, could be Beijing, Bangkok, doesn't matter. They're great. There is a reason why people gravitate towards those realities, because that's where you can build your career. You can move fast, break things and rebuild. That might not it might not be as easy to do it in from a distance, from you know being in the south of Italy. I don't know because I've never tested it. So for me, it was a little bit different because I already had a network built, a career built. The resume was already there, so it wasn't necessarily about proving myself. It was about, if maybe it was about taking a step back and saying, hey, I'm just taking back some of that personal independence that I was so much craving that I didn't know I craved. So I'm not sure, but I think it's different for everyone. But I personally don't think at 25 I could have made the move. I was in the middle of my, I guess, the best learning years from a career perspective. And plus, when I was 25, I don't think the digital world was as advanced as it is today from a remote work perspective. So maybe I think it's different today for sure.
Do you think you're part of that digital nomad tribe?
Uh, I guess. I mean, I never, I've authored an article for Nomad magazine talking about whether I consider myself one, but I mean, I like to think that I have a stable residence. I do travel when I feel like it, which is again something that a lot of people, they're like, "Oh, I'll travel when I retire." Well, I don't want to travel when I can't walk, or I want to travel when I'm full of life and I can enjoy every aspect of the trip. So, in many aspects, yes, because I travel often. You'll find me working from virtually every corner of the world. In December, I was in Japan. Just got back from a trip to north of Italy, where I was in Slovenia and Croatia. I'm going to be in Berlin in April and potentially in Toronto for Easter. So yeah, I don't. But to be a nomad, I would need to not have. I guess I'm not even sure, but I do have a steady address.
There you go. Alright, uh, pushing forward. So here you are today. You how do you how do you feel you're able to apply your life lessons into your work? So, for example, this you don't need to go at warp speed. You talked a little bit about how you're pretty focused on the clients you take on, in that it's not about necessarily billable hours, it's about meaningful outcomes. How do you translate that into the work you're delivering kind of at this, nexus of digital plus AI on behalf of the work you're doing?
Well, I think AI has made it, um, the whole quantity. The more AI has made this extremely clear, abundantly clear, that the quantity no longer matters, particularly when it comes to content, marketing, messaging, copy, however you want to split it. Considering that ChatGPT can, as I said before, can spit thousands of words per second and create books. I can virtually write a book about Thai cuisine in about an hour if I want to. So it's not necessarily about the quantity and the speed of what somebody can produce. It's about the quality of it all, how meaningful it is, and what's the strategy behind it. So I think for me, taking a step back and regaining some of my time, some of my independence, I think that also matters because it allows me to take a step back, even when it comes to the work for the clients, and say, "Hey, you've created this strategy and you've used it for a year and a half, 2 years, some three. Um, let's look at why it's not working, or what are the aspects of it that are not working, and we take a step back and we focus instead on the quantity, and meaning just because your team is always working doesn't necessarily mean they're producing. That just means they're worked to the bone, that they're just running, but they're not really stopping to look and say, hey, I think this is where things are breaking down, or hey, I think this is where we need more quality, take a step back and focus more on this. So a lot of times what I do with a lot of my clients is not necessarily about, reinventing the wheel or creating brand new strategies. It's just about looking at, from a marketing perspective, at the things that potentially there need to be rethought, to think outside the box. And it's funny because to think outside the box, I moved thousands of miles away to be as far as possible from the box. And that allows me to be like, hey, I have a different perspective. And that's generally been very, very, very successful for me, when it comes to looking at uh, demographics, strategies from the outside, as an observer. Not, and that's something that in boardrooms we talked about a lot, and we still talk about it a lot. The team that's involved in the creation of the product is sometimes forced to in the box. You are so intimate with the product. You're so intimate with what you do, with the messaging should be, because but it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody from the outside is understanding a damn thing of what you're saying, or that it's clear to them. So taking a step back or introducing somebody from the outside that looks at everything and says, I don't think that's clear, or I don't think I in 10 seconds that I've looked at your product, I'm more confused than I was before. So those small things can be extremely meaningful and powerful in changing the course of a marketing campaign or the overall strategy of a company. Because the people that work in it, and that's something that I can remember, but one of my bosses told me once, was like, if you work on your business, you can't work in your business. So they're two separate personas. Because if you're working inside, you're just constantly looking from the inside, but you don't have the time to look at it from the outside. But the people that are buying into your idea, your product, whatever it is, they come from the outside. They have no clue what you do or why they should choose you over somebody else.
I like that. That's very well told. And some neat perspective there. An outsider
I hope so.
in. What's that?
I hope so. It makes
Yeah.
sense to me.
And I can see you're living it, and you're able to apply some of what you're living into the work you're doing. And, I took some notes here on quality, and you seem to have these really neat views on how to apply quality, both against work, against life, against time, with some a neat prism. So I really enjoyed hearing that. All right. So now we've spent our time here. We've talked a lot about your journey. Um, a lot of, less noise to find your voice is one of the notes I took. This concept of velocity, and velocity as a constraint, and velocity as an activity is not necessarily equate to productivity. You're here dialing in from Southern Italy, where there's a very different type of table. Pace of the meal looks a lot different than, say, the pace of New England or Toronto, New
Yeah,
England, where I'm from, or New York, or you name your big city environment. Go, go, go. One of the segments of our show here on the Flip Story is the recipe book, and I'd like to invite you to provide your recipe here for how others can flip their own story. Maybe perhaps a sprinkle of ingredients along with maybe a
sure.
cooking approach.
Sure. I mean, I have this has become one of my favorite recipes. It's called pasta with mollica. Mollica is breadcrumbs, but the way you make it, this is something that an old nonna taught me how to make. You use stale bread that people think about throwing it out. Stale bread. You break it down into breadcrumbs, then olive oil, garlic, chili, pepper, and you toast the breadcrumbs of old bread into the pan. Why it's interesting is because something that you were throwing out will actually become the most delicious thing in the actual dish. And if you leave it too long, burns the garlic. Too little, gets the bread soggy, not crispy. So I think that's the perfect explanation of what I think it should be. It's about balance. And sometimes the things that you ignore or you want to throw out, they might actually become the centerpiece of a delicious plate of pasta or life.
Bravo. Well done. I love that. All right. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming on the show. Anthony, where can people find you?
AnthonyNealMacri.com is my website, blog where I write a lot about marketing, life in the south of Italy, Instagram, A&M Macri, that's my profile. Yeah,
All
easy.
right. I'll pop those links in the show notes as well. So, with
Thank
that,
you.
I just really, I do want to say thank you so much for coming on the show.
This was fun.
Yeah, thank you. I had a blast too. Thank you for just sharing very generously and telling your story of kind of travel and showing how necessarily changing geography can have more impact than just on the physical space. It can also really impact your mindset. So it's been a lot of fun.
Thank
And
you.
with that, my pleasure. So we'll see you all next time on the Flip Story.